All right, does anybody have any questions before we start? All right, so we left off talking about money, and we found that money, the way it's defined, money can be created in a couple different ways. One way that governments can create money is by running to the old printing press, right? Like this right over here, pushing a button, says do not touch, if they want it to work this way. Hey, I got some money to go spend, buy weapons of mass destruction and weapons and stuff. That's pretty cool, right? So they can go, I mean, the government makes this stuff, right? So the government can't print money. They can just print it off. So that's one way that money's created. What was the other way, probably the way that a lot more money's created that we did last time? How was money created? Through the banking system. Excellent, Cameron. All right. So the banking system actually created money through the $10,000 being put into an account, and then that bank loaning out a fraction of it to Andrew to go buy his car. So Stephanie had access to her $10,000. Andrew goes and buys a car from LDP Motors or whatever. They deposit their check into what bank was that? First National, right? First National Bank makes a loan out for $6,400, and away we go. So we've got money being created because money, by definition of the government, using M1 is equal to what? Currency plus checking account deposits, right? So we had checking accounts, right? So actual physical checks, don't get fooled on a homework problem or a test problem. The actual physical paper check is not money. It's the checking account, the deposit that you have on with a bank. And so by transferring the $10,000 from the backyard into a checking account, money was created in the system. So that was our multiplying process. And so our M2 was M1 plus, what do we add on? Savings now, savings accounts plus small time deposits plus, there's one more, what was it? Money market. Money market accounts. So by adding these three on, we made the measure of money, the quantity of money, bigger, because we're adding on to M1 these other account balances. That's how we measure the quantity of money in the United States. All right, so I want to start off today with who controls this stuff in a little bit more detail. So the Federal Reserve Bank, which I think we wrote out last time, who we affectionately call the Fed. This is the government entity that controls the supply of money. The government entity that controls the supply of money and banking regulations. All right, so it is composed of 7 members. And it was created in 1913. So that makes it only how old? It was created in 1913. 103, 104, whatever, right? So it's only about 100 years old. How old is our country again? How old is our country? 240-ish. So check it out. We were running our country for a long time without a central bank. That's kind of mind-boggling. Banks were actually run by just private individuals, private companies at the time. Usually it was the rich person in town that had a lot of money, and they would start to kind of serve as a place to go for loans. Hey, let me go to rich old Scrooge and get a loan because I want to start a business, and he's the only guy in town that seems to have plenty of money. So old Scrooge starts making some loans out. Well, other people wanted to, get a piece of that action and get some money on their savings, so they started depositing money with Mr. Scrooge, and basically a bank was formed. But a long time, those banks weren't governed by any central body in the United States, and so they would go about their business, taking in deposits, making loans. But inevitably, what would go on is there'd be a rumor started about old Mr. Scrooge. Hey, did you hear about Scrooge just lost a bunch of money of his oil money, and something's going bad down in Texas. I'm going to go get my money out of the bank because he ain't going to have it, right? They remember when we talked about the banking system, the bank doesn't have Stephanie's money at any point in time. When she puts that $10,000 in, the bank is loaning out a fraction of it. In the example we went through, the bank was loaning out 80% of it. So if everybody comes to the bank at one time, Stephanie and every other person, old Mr. Scrooge doesn't have all the money. It's been loaned out. So that would cause banks to fail. And so for a number of years, they dabbled with some other types of central banks or national banks, but Americans in general were really not very trusting of the government. That was this whole Declaration of Independence, individual liberty, individual freedoms, and it was just kind of a little bit funny. Whoops, that didn't explode on anybody. That was your pen, wasn't it? So they didn't have a lot of trust having a central bank that would control money, and so that's why it took so long. The central bank is only 100 years old. So we really are just kind of starting, and frankly, there's some people who think we should abolish the Federal Reserve Bank or really restrict their powers, and that's part of what we'll get into in this chapter of what are the different powers of the central bank. All right, so started in 1913. Started in 1913. There was a real bad bank run in 1907. I kind of started thinking, all right, let's try to get a central bank together. I think it could be. And so what it was, and this was the Federal Reserve Act, was the law that was passed, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, and the idea was for the central bank to be the banker's bank. So if we have the good old US of A here, and we have the central bank of the United States, the central bank, which isn't located in Kansas, by the way, it's in DC, but I'm not trying to be real geographical, I'm just trying to think conceptually here. So if we have banks in different geographic regions that now have to put money on deposit with the central bank. So remember when Stephanie did her $10,000 deposit, the Fed took $2,000 of it. So this bank, TD Bank that she was at, TD Bank put $2,000 on deposit with the central bank. And then they were free to loan out their excess reserves of $8,000. Now, if everybody starts to do that, and they send their money, their 20%, their 20%, their 20%, then it's possible that when old man Scrooge starts to go under over here in South Carolina, then the central bank can step into those depositors. Let's say that the depositors had $100 million in their bank. The central bank says, yeah, old man Scrooge is out of money, but don't worry. He took out an insurance policy, basically. He's been keeping money on with me, and I've got him covered. So keep coming to the window. Don't worry about it. Your money's there. It's fine. And so the central bank, at times in our history, has driven carloads full of cash to banks that were in trouble to make sure everybody was comfortable that, hey, yeah, I guess the government really does have my back on this with the system that they have in place. And so that took a while, but that was the primary function of the central bank, was to be the banker's bank. Okay? Any questions on that? So the banker's bank concept is that each member bank, which is all of them, but it used to be commercial banks, and that gets into a little bit more detail, but each member bank must keep a fraction of deposits, which we already covered was required reserves, must keep a fraction of deposits on deposit with the Fed, with the central bank. Okay, so what is the composition of the people who make up this board? Well, there's 7 people that make up the Federal Reserve Board. So there's a 7-member Board of Governors. The 7-member Board of Governors that basically run the bank. So 7-member Board of Governors run the Fed. They are in charge of it. They are appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate. Appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. So other parts of government are involved with who gets in there. Each one of them is going to serve a 14-year term, long term, a 14-year staggered term. So we got 7 people serving a 14-year staggered term. Why do you think we set it up that way? Given what the little bit that you know here, we're appointed by the President of the United States, confirmed by the Senate, a staggered term. Everybody with me on that? That one person's term is that 14 years, another person's term is that 14 years, another person's term is that 14 years, another person's term is that 14 years, right? So they're offset. Their 14-year term is staggered. Why would that be important?
So you didn't just have a whole new calendar.
Yeah, so we don't just turn over the whole thing in one time. If we did turn over the whole thing at one time, what other problem might it present?
Drastic changes in policy.
Yeah, drastic policy changes because we do have a loss of continuity. What do you think about this? That could be a problem too, right? So if we happened to be, do you think Obama's selection of the 7 might be different than Trump's selection of the 7? Just take a stab. What do you think? Yes or no? judging by what's been going on with these other positions, I'd say there's a pretty good chance that we'd have a different type of cabinet put together. So with a 14-year term, it's possible that you'll be spanning multiple presidents, right? Because the president serves a 4-year term, they get reelected, they get 4 years, but then they're capped. So any president is capped at an 8-year term. The way this is set up is to have that continuity of policy, to not allow any single president too much power in the selection of who is going to join the board. All right, questions or comments there?
So can a member resign?
Yes, and they often do. Yeah. So that's the kind of the tricky part. In fact, most members don't serve the full 14 years. And the reasons are that they turn out to be pretty valuable on Wall Street. If you've served on the central bank and you've kind of studied interest rates and you kind of know the interworkings of maybe the people there and stuff, you're likely going to command at least $1 million a year pay on Wall Street. At least $1 million, probably higher, as kind of an analyst, consultant, chief economist person. And so when you're working for the Fed, you're a couple notches under that. You're probably making a couple $100,000, maybe up to 300,000, but not much more. So it's an awfully big carrot to say, this has been fun, but maybe I'll try something different. All right, so hopefully you guys know that you are getting your degree from the Angel Snyder School of Business. So, and I am the Wayne Angel Chair of Economics is my position title. And the reason is that Wayne Angel served on this board and had one of those Wall Street gigs. And he donated $1 million to the university. And that helped create my position. So I have kind of a name chair position, and I get some other little benefits like a little travel is one thing to go to conferences and some other things due to what Wayne Angel did. So he got appointed in 1985 to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. So 1985, so this is kind of a little note for Ottawa history here. Wayne Angel was one of these governors. So he was appointed in 1985 by President Reagan. So when I visited Wayne about a year ago, well, a little over a year ago, last December, so not this December, December before, because he was selling his condo in Washington, D.C., 19th floor overlooking the Arlington Cemetery, and you can see the National Mall and everything up on the, it was about 3,000 square foot condo with a wraparound deck that had about a 280-degree view of Washington, D.C. Pretty friggin' awesome. But they were selling that, and they did just sell it finally. I was going through his library and stuff and looking at things. So he has this letter from President Reagan. So a hand-signed letter from President Reagan saying, Wayne, we enjoyed your tenure, blah, blah, blah. Nice full personal letter from President Reagan on his shelf. So that's pretty cool part of history. So in 1993, Wayne went on to Bear Stearns on Wall Street and was chief economist at Bear Stearns. So he did a 8-year term, 8 of his 14 years. So yeah, that's pretty common to leave early. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, so there is a chair. So one of these 7 members is the chair. And the chair serves a 4-year renewable term. A 4-year renewable term. Does anybody know the chair of the Federal Reserve? Extra credit point. Take a stab. Doesn't hurt to take a stab. Take a name. Just take a guess. No, it's not. So Trump wouldn't have had anything to do with it because the chair's been in this position now for 3 years, I think, 3 or 4 years. Ooh, you're getting close. I got my extra credit pen coming out here. What did you say? I think I'm going to give you an extra credit point for just your jaw.
I'm going to say Jeanette Yellen.
Oh, yeah, that's close, Jacob. Good. Nice job. All right. Janet Yellen. So the fact that you could pull that off was pretty good, the way you did it. All right. So I was going to say, I didn't want to give it away, but normally we said the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So Janet Yellen is the first female to ever serve as the chair of the Federal Reserve. So chair serves 4-year renewable term. The current person is Janet Yellen. And prior to that was Ben Bernanke. And then I'm just going to give you another prior to that was Alan Greenspan. Just some names that might come up in your readings even, just so that you got them down. And then lastly, the prior to Alan Greenspan was Paul Volcker, and that's the one that Wayne started off with. But and Paul did some pretty awesome stuff. So Janet Yellen is our current chair, and so you know when I didn't really hear this come up at all during the election. You know, a lot of people were disappointed because we didn't have our first female president and how encouraging and uplifting and whatever that would be. But we've had Janet Yellen for the last 3 years, and her position is considered to be the second most powerful position in Washington. She is the second most powerful person in Washington. That's kind of just a general common thing that people have with Washington, D.C. The president, number one, because Trump can roll out of bed and hit that red button and boom, nuclear war started or whatever. So the president's number one usually in terms of power, but Janet Yellen's number two. What do you think would make her position so powerful? What does it mean to have power? What does it mean to have power? Control? What else? What else could you add to that? I mean, I'd agree to some degree control. If you have power, what do you have? What can you do? Who wants to take that one on? Let me come back here. Give me a number between 3 and 8. 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Power. What's power to you? What do you think power means? Give your name again for Jacob. Yeah, and you can think about the power of the presidency. Obama's power, Trump's power, not just in general. If you hold the presidency, what does having power mean? Okay, different regulations, and what makes them powerful? Like the city administrator here in Ottawa can pass some regulations too for the city, and so that's a certain amount of power. But wouldn't we say that the city administrator here doesn't have quite as much power as the president of the United States? So what comes along with that? You know, the regulation thing, or what makes it more powerful? Lance? Okay, over the nation. So just the quantity of people that can be affected. Doesn't that kind of influence power? So there's kind of a connection there with the ability to do something, but maybe more importantly, what makes it powerful is how many people it influences. How many people does it influence at one time? And so with the Federal Reserve being able to, you know, control the supply of money, Janet can press a button, have more of this stuff, that affects some people, right? So we've got interest rates on car loans and house loans. You know, how many people does that influence? How many people have car loans? How many people have house loans? Well, part of those decisions on whether interest rates are going up or interest rates are going down is due to what Janet is thinking. Now, Janet will consult with these other members, right? But the chair is in the power position to kind of drive the dialogue and to kind of take things drive. And they're usually, they do consult. There's rarely situation, there's never been a situation that I'm aware of where the chair of the Federal Reserve had one idea, the 6 other members were opposed, and the chair did it anyway. It just doesn't really work that way. For one thing, they're economists, so they kind of all rationalize, well, this theory supports this thing or whatever, so you usually have some people agreeing with you. But in the case of Wayne Angell, he was kind of known as a fighter on that 7-member board, and so as we'll learn more in this chapter and some of the later ones, the United States was coming off some really heavy inflation during the 1970s and into the early 80s. And so Wayne Angell ended up getting known as the inflation hawk. So like he was there in those meetings. If they were ever thinking about being kind of loose with monetary policy, something that might be inflationary, he was there to say, no, you can't do that, or I don't think we should do that. And then he would try to garner support from other members of the board, so to really direct that policy. So, and so one of the stories, I wish we could have, Wayne's still, by the way, he's 89, so he's getting up there, but he was just on campus last October. It'd be fun to get him to tell these stories. I had him visit my money and banking class 3 years ago, and he's got some stories of when he first started at the Fed, and he kind of went against the chair at the time when he first joined, and that kind of raised a few eyebrows, like, who is this guy from Kansas that we got? Because he was born in Kansas, was at Ottawa University he graduated from OU in 1955, went to KU for his PhD in economics, and then he came back to OU for about 25 years. So from the late 50s all the way up to the 80s, he was a professor here, and he had various roles with the university. So he had pretty deep ties to Kansas. And then also in between there, he served on the Kansas state legislature. So he was a state representative. So he got involved in some politics and other things as well. Okay, so Janet Yellen, let me put the second most powerful business here. So second most powerful position in Washington, D.C., or in the government in general. Now, if Janet still has Trump over her head, though, he's the most powerful, isn't her power really limited? Like, almost not having power, what's the deal with that? Well, this is the other fun part of the story. So if Trump picks up the phone, says, I don't know if I can do a Trump imitation, so. I didn't practice this at all, so I don't think I've ever done a Trump. So let me see here. Janet, we got to raise the interest rates. It's got to be huge, huge, I'm saying. Get it done. All right? So something like that. Janet is at complete liberty to, hopefully this is a video conference with Trump. Maybe he was doing that with a video conference. She can literally do this. So the Federal Reserve is completely independent of the federal government. It operates completely independently. Her boss is not Trump. She is the top of the heap. So the Federal Reserve is set up to be completely independent from the presidency and Congress, other than this little thing here. Once the person gets in, they get appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. But once they're actually in position, they are completely independent of political pressures. That's true whether it was the Obama regime or whether it's Trump regime or any other regime. So they make their own decisions. And so that's part of where this power comes from, because it really does reside with them on monetary policy for the country. So what Obama and Trump and Congress work with, they've got the regulation part, setting taxes, spending money, what we call fiscal policy. The Federal Reserve deals with what we call monetary policy, everything to dealing with banking the things that I mentioned here, banking regulation and interest rates and the supply of money. And then we'll talk more about that because they don't control every interest rate, by the way. That's a market-driven price. All right, let me pause there for a second. Any questions? All right. So we've got 12 Federal Reserve banks. So separate from the 7 member, I'm kind of outside that bullet now. We've got 12 Federal Reserve banks. And each one of these has their own president, each with its own president. Has anybody been to the Federal Reserve Bank in, oops. Has anybody been to the Federal Reserve Bank in Kansas City? Yeah? Okay, I usually take a group, about every other year. I try to do it when we do money and banking, but if you get a chance to go there, it's kind of fun. You get to see a bunch of money because they do act, one of the functions of the Fed that will show later is to take in old bills and count them for banks and stuff. So it's a mind-boggling amount of money to have a glass room that you can look at. By the way, the full security to get into this place, I mean, they have it tied down, but there's literally workers in there that are counting money and putting it in stacks so that it'll be delivered to banks. And they have these driverless carts that deliver it to the main vault. So no humans actually ever go into the big vault. It's all by these automatic cars that they call Humpty Dumpty and, no, it's Fred, I can't remember. It was some nursery rhyme where there's 3 of them. Here are the 12 Federal Reserve banks. So if you pull out a dollar, they're starting to get away from this, but I used to do this a little bit more, trying to see if we can identify all the banks, but usually we can't. We won't get there, but on the older dollar bills, there is the bank where it was issued. So here's the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, right? So this dollar was printed in Cleveland here at one of the banks. And so usually I try to have the class, with the new currency now, they're doing it in different ways, but have the class try to see if we call 12 Federal Reserve banks, but that exercise doesn't go quite as good. But that's our spots. So over the years, I've been to the Minneapolis Fed, I've been to the Chicago Fed, and this conference that I'm going to the Miami branch of the Atlanta Fed. So each one of these branches, each one of these 12 banks has some other branches. Look at what's noticeable about the geography of the coverage. What kind of jumps out to you here? Where's the concentration? Kind of East Coast, right? We seem to have this side heavily concentrated. Does that make sense? 1913, right? Did we have Las Vegas boom, the way it looks today back then? Heck no, it was a big desert, right? So we had population that was a bit different. And so the initial allocation of these banks, even Kansas City, this orange area is our district that the Kansas City branch covers. And so we have another branch office over in Omaha, and I think there's another one in Denver. So there's branch offices that help give a little bit bigger. So as the population grew, instead of adding more banks, they added branch offices, which still ultimately report just to the single one president. So each one of these banks has a president, and the idea is that these 12 folks will get information back to Washington, D.C., where Wayne Angel and his other 6 buddies are sitting in a room trying to do monetary policy. And that way, we had the interest of the Midwest kind of at hand, that we weren't letting New York rule the roost, right? Kind of similar to our electoral system too, right? If we looked at the map, Hillary had the popular vote by a little bit, right? But where was that concentrated? Well, it was all here and then pretty much the whole state of California and Florida. So she had, well, no, not Florida. She didn't get Florida, did she? Okay. So it was East Coast and California is where she picked up because those are heavily populated areas. Well, maybe she forgot to check that the popular vote doesn't win the election. So Trump, on that regard, was a little bit better on strategy of kind of getting out to the rest of the country. And so kind of a similar thing's going on here. The what's going on in Minneapolis could be a little different. What's going on in Dallas, what's going on in San Francisco. So this way, we're getting input about the farmers in the Midwest as opposed to just maybe the East Coast or the shipping that's going on from China that's coming into LA, right? So we got hopefully more people's interests covered with this setup. This was also real important when I mentioned that the United States citizens were awfully leery of big government, and so having too much power concentrated in one place. And so this kind of set better with them. It was a little bit more politically feasible to say, hey, there's going to be 12 banks. Each one of these are going to have voting rights on different things. And so we'll have more people's interests covered. All right, so questions or comments there? All right. There's another committee that's important to mention, and that is the Federal Open Market Committee. The FOMC. So this will be a little separate bullet. The Federal Open Market Committee. The FOMC. These guys get together and really determine interest rates and monetary policy. So there's a meeting. So they meet to determine and vote on interest rate changes. Especially interest rate changes, but also at other policy. So if you hear about there being a Fed meeting, which by the way, there's one today, I think. It's always on a Wednesday. I think they are meeting today. They meet about, I think it's every 6 weeks, but depending on how the holidays go, so a little over a month, they get together and make an announcement about whether they're going to push interest rates up or change them, or put them down, or keep them the same. And so there is there's 12 members total on the Federal Open Market Committee. It's the 7 Board of Governors plus 4 rotating Fed presidents. So 4 of the 12, it actually turns out to be 4 of the 11, for a reason I'll explain in a second, plus 1, the New York Fed president. So there's your 12 members, 7-member Board of Governors, plus the 4 rotating Fed presidents, plus the 1 New York Fed president. All of the members actually go to this meeting. It's just that these are the ones who have voting power. Why do you think the New York president is included in this thing on influencing interest rates? What's that? Wall Street, yes. So especially in the past, what we're going to learn today is how the Fed actually manipulates interest rates, and they do it by buying and selling bonds. And so they have to be being close to Wall Street, especially important back then. It's still kind of important today because the New York president, there's still kind of word on the street and ways to do things, but it's becoming less and less important. But so they always had the New York Fed presidents on that because they were close to Wall Street to do some of the changes. Okay, another bullet. What backs your currency? So we're talking about the Fed. They have the right to print it off. They can run the printing press. So what's backing this stuff? If I go bring this to Janet and I say, hey, what's backing this? What will she give me if I give this, right? What do you think?
Well, didn't it used to be like gold in Fort Knox?
It was gold in Fort Knox was part of it, yes. So there was gold. Is that still true today? No. So if you go to Janet and say, I demand something, she might say, okay, no problem, here's 5 ones. All right, so she might, or she'll give me another 5 that's more crispier than this one. But the US government does not back anything. This is what we call fiat money. It's unbacked currency. It is truly worthless. It has no value. There is no gold. There is no nothing. This is fiat money. How does that make you feel? What does it get its value from? Where does it get its value from? Us saying, so other people saying it has value, right? So just remember, if you ever are confused on what backs this, if you flip it over, I already got the screen down, so I won't do it. But right above here it says, "In God we trust." That's what you got going for you. Don't trust the government; they don't have this backed. But hopefully you got God on your side, because there's nothing else from the federal government backing that. So the actions that the Federal Reserve takes has an impact on the value of the currency, the value domestically, as well as the value around the globe. And so if Janet goes ahead and presses the button and prints off more, that's going to have an impact. That's what we're going to talk about next, is what is the impact of the things they can do. All right, so let's see, I think we'll do the 3 tools of the Federal Reserve next. So 3 tools of the Fed. Number 1 is changes. Matter of fact, I'm going to put this one first. I usually don't put it first, but since I just brought it up, open market operations. Open market operations. So they can do an open market purchase or sale of bonds to change the money supply. for example, M2 is the one that they primarily, so the quantity of money, they can do an open market purchase or sale. So, what is a bond? What is a bond? Who's had a little business 101, got a rough idea of a bond for me?
Loan that the government takes from citizens to the government, and then you're going to get.
Okay, so it is an IOU, yes, and it does not have to be the government. So the government, there are government bonds, but there's also corporate bonds. So if Ford Motor Company, since they're very credible, if they want to raise some money, they don't have to go to their banker. They could go to Wall Street and say, hey, I want to do some IOUs. I want to sell some bonds. And so here's the deal. If somebody gives me $1 million, I will pay them out X% interest, right? Or kind of have a terms of a loan with a kind of forward directly to the person through Wall Street. So they can do a corporate bond. But the government bond is the one that is the one that the Fed has usually pursued over the years and keeps. So this is what it looks like. Here's one of them. I just happen to have one. So it's literally a piece of paper. Now, what forces the government to have to issue a bond? What forces the government to borrow money? What went on that caused them, in the simplest terms? So this year, for 2016, this last year, what would have forced the government to have to borrow some money in the bond market? How does the government make money? If I want to use that word. How do they generate funds to pay for stuff? Through taxes. And so if they had to borrow, what was true about taxes and government spending? Yeah, just like an individual, they're spending more than they're getting. So government spending on weapons of mass destruction and other stuff was greater than the tax revenue that was collected. So if they don't have the money, they don't have the money. They have to get the money. Where do they get it? They go and borrow it. And so the government issues these bonds. And so a bond has some parts to it. So you've got the value of the bond. So here I'm holding a $1 million face value of the bond. And it says, in 5 years, I'm going to pay you back the full amount. And then each year, I'm going to give you $50,000. So the $50,000 is called the coupon payment. And this is the face value of the bond. So that's the deal. It's just a loan, like you think about it. Except it doesn't actually show the interest rate per se. It just says the deal is we've got a $1 million, so example of a bond, government bond. We've got a $1 million face value, which is the loan amount. We've got 5 years, which is the term. And then we have $50,000 per year is what we call the coupon payment, which is basically like interest, right? But instead of stating the interest rate, they just state the payments that are going to be made. So Obama's got or Trump now, I got to shift my gears here. So Trump's now got $1 million debt that is going to be over the next 5 years. So at the end of 5 years, they owe the $1 million back. And then in the meantime, they're going to be making $50,000 a year. Now, what is that interest rate using the numbers that I got here? What would you calculate the interest rate to be? If you've got $50,000 for a year's worth of interest payments, basically, what is the interest rate? 5, yep, you're on it, 5%, right? So $1 million, 10% is 100,000. This is the way my brain always works. I kind of go to 10%. 10% is 100,000. Half of that is 50, so it's 5%. So we got a 5% interest rate basically on this debt. All right, so the government runs their business independent of Janet's business, right? They want to have a new public program, a new spending program. They don't have the money for it. Congress and Obama just start handing these things out, right? So they hand them out, and then that, of course, generates some money for them to make their bills. Now, who bought this? Well, it could have been Addie. Addie had a nice little savings that she was looking for a nice, safe investment. How often has the U.S. government defaulted on their bonds? Never. So they're really safe. So they're the safest thing out there, government bonds. So Addie wanted to have her money in a really, really, really safe place. She trusted the government that they're going to make their bills. They've never shown any history not to pay their bills. So it's basically risk-free is what Wall Street treats it as. It's kind of a risk-free investment. Now, she's holding that to 5 years. Does she have to hold it for 5 years? What if next year she's out house shopping and she found the perfect house for $2 million? Right? She's been doing her personal finance stuff, and so she's got a $2 million house. She's a multimillionaire at this point, and she wants to use some of that money. What can she do? Sell it. So go ahead and sell it to DJ there. And so in the meantime, now DJ's got it, sold it to Addie. Addie's now left with some money. She can go buy her house, right? So she buys her house from Canada over here. Canada gets her house. So now we've got money kind of circulating around, right? DJ gets sick of it after 1 year. He holds it. It's still not due till 2021, and he can sell it to Andy, right? And that bond just keeps going on Wall Street day in and day out. Go ahead and start passing that thing around. Just that. You guys are in the trading. You're out in the marketplace. You've got money floating around. Go ahead and start passing that money. You went and bought something with it, right? So now we've got that kind of the same effect of going out to buy the Apple iPod. So you guys are the economy, and I'm going to be Janet Yellen. I'm going to be Janet Yellen of the Fed. And I'm going to do an open market purchase of a bond. What happens to the money supply? If I do an open market purchase of the bond, what happens to the money supply? I'm Janet Yellen. And I'm like, hey, this is on Wall Street. I'll buy it from you. What happened to the money supply? What happened to the supply of money now in the United States? It went up, right? So now Hannah's got more money. The other money that was out in the system is still out there, right? So now we've got Hannah with some additional money. Janet is holding the bond. If Janet continues to hold the bond, ultimately Trump will pay Janet because Trump is obligated to pay whoever's holding the bond. And so that is an open market purchase to change the supply of money in the United States. Hey, Joe. Doing a little bond trading today, actually. So
Do you want my information?
I did already. Was anybody not here? I'll get you after class because I think we had a pretty full class before. So I just wanted Joe to stop by. Did you come up with a time for Monday or Tuesday yet?
Like 7 or 8. I mean, I can do either Monday or Tuesday. Is there a certain day that works best for you guys?
Since you guys are present, you're going to get picks with how many people say. So it's basically it's a review session for the test. And so how many people would like Monday over Tuesday? So how many people want Monday? How many people want Tuesday? Oh gosh, do I really have to count? Did you count?
That's close.
All right, let's do hands real quick. So Tuesday, keep your hands up. Tuesday, keep your hands up. 1, 2, it's really close. 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. No 2 hands, Lance. Okay, Monday. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes, it looks like Tuesday has it. All right, so 7 or 8. Usually 8 is
Eight,
with
probably.
athletics, so probably 8. Okay, so Tuesday at 8. All right on that.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks, sir.
See you guys then.
All right, so what we just showed is how the Federal Reserve can impact the supply of money out in the system. All right, now, if we do an open market sale, Janet takes one of these and goes to the market, goes to Wall Street, and says, hey, I'll sell you that. See how I get my money back at the end of the day? This is all very strategic. So we get the money comes back to Janet, right? And now we have that bond floating out there. So that is an open market purchase or sale, and that is the one that's used the most for policy. And so the Federal Open Market Committee is the group that determines whether we're going to do some purchasing or selling. Okay? All right, questions there? All right, let's move on. We'll talk a little bit more about that one later too. But so open market operations is one tool of the Fed. Number 2 is a change in the required reserves. A change in the required reserves. So the Fed determines the required reserve ratio that we talked about. Remember when we said it was 20% before? So if the Fed increases, if there's an increase in the required reserve ratio, bumping it from 20% to maybe 25%, what's going to happen to the money supply? Is it going to go up or down? If the Fed increases the requirements by banks, so on that example that I erased here, TD Bank used to have to hold back 20%, now they have to hold back 25%. Is that going to lead to an increase in the money supply or a decrease? Decrease. I heard a few increases. I know this gets a little bit weird. So imagine if it went from 20% to 25%, now from Stephanie's deposit of $10,000, the bank would be putting $2,500 on deposit, and $7,500 would be the amount that would be loaned out. So there'd be less money out in circulation, right? Less loans being made. So that's going to change that. So if there's an increase in the required reserve ratio, that leads to a decrease in the money supply. A decrease in MS, the money supply, which we'll start modeling a little bit more carefully. I did want to do I forgot to do the effects on the money supply for the open market purchase and sale, so let's sneak those in. So, I don't know where you guys want to put them on your paper, but you can squeeze them in here somewhere. It's going to be pretty short. So, an open market purchase leads to an increase or decrease in the money supply again? A purchase. Open market purchase of bonds. Increase or decrease? Increase, good. Now, this is where the visual, I kind of do this intentionally. When you're doing your homework or test, kind of remember, I'm Janet. If I'm purchasing a bond, you guys are the public sector, you're the economy. I'm putting money into the economy, right? Increases the money supply. I'm holding the bond now. With a sale, I'm putting a bond back into the circulation and taking the money. The money's no longer in circulation when Janet's holding it. Remember, also banks that hold money is not in circulation either. So a sale does the opposite. Okay, number 3 on our 3 tools is the discount rate. So a change in the discount rate. So, remember the banker's bank? So recall, banker's bank. If old Mr. Scrooge got into trouble and had to get bailed out by the central bank, he can't just do that for free. He's really getting a loan from the bank, from the central bank. So you can think about the banker's bank. The banker's bank, the central bank, gives loans to banks that need them, and the interest rate they charge is the discount rate. So this is the interest rate charged for loans to bank from the Fed. So if you go to Janet for a loan, you're going to pay the discount rate. This is only open to banks, by the way. Another thing that's kind of confusing often is that people tend to think, oh, the Federal Reserve controls the interest rates. Well, they really don't. This is actually the only interest rate they control specifically. So put a note down here. This is the only rate the Fed determines or sets. They're going to set the interest rate higher, right? All other interest rates are market determined. What do we mean by that? We mean a little supply and demand action. Are market determined. So, you know, credit cards, car loans, houses, mortgages, interest rates on corporate bonds, even interest rates on government bonds, for that matter. Those are all determined by other forces than the Federal Reserve. So when we say Janet has power to change interest rates, this is the only interest rate that they actually set. Like it's going to be 2.3% today, and that's what they're going to announce today as on where they would change some of their interest rates. What happens though is that all the other rates start to kind of follow suit, and through open market operations, they can put pressure on interest rates in different directions, right? So through open market operations, if they end up putting more money out there, more money will be lent out. That's going to have an impact on the market interest rate too. So that's part of the pressure. So while they're not setting it and saying the interest rate on all car loans is 10%, as long as they have a credit rating greater than 740 or something, right? They don't do that. But through their actions, they might be able to kind of push interest rates up or push interest rates down by doing these open market operations. Okay, questions or comments there? All right. Well, we are overdue getting into our, to put a little, oh wait, let me, I didn't put the direction of the change here. So with the discount rate, if there's an increase in the discount rate, if the Fed chooses to raise that interest rate, is that going to tend to be leading to more money being out there or less? Less. Right? So it's kind of similar. So it's kind of restrictive. It's okay for your gut feeling here that interest rates are going to be higher, and so the money supply is going to fall. Okay, So that is the Federal Reserve toolbox. And now we need to see what the market looks like. I decided to save the supply and demand business for the end this time. So, the money market. So the money market explains changes in the equilibrium amount of money in circulation and the interest rate. Through supply and demand for money. Explains changes in the equilibrium amount of money in circulation and the interest rate through supply and demand. So we drew a quick picture of this before, but we really didn't get into details. So draw a nice big graph for yourself. On the horizontal axis, we're going to be measuring the quantity of money. So for instance, like our M2 measure, right? So for example, like M2, which includes both currency and all these checking accounts and savings accounts. And then we've got the interest rate, little I, being measured here. And this is the nominal interest rate. The nominal interest rate. We've seen it before with the Fisher formula. That's our rate that gets charged. If I go to the bank and they tell me they're gonna give me 1.5% on my savings account, it's that rate, right? It's the nominal stated interest rate. All right, so I'm gonna start off with the supply curve. The supply curve is perfectly vertical the way we show this in this market. Now, those of you who had a little math expertise, and maybe those of you who just looked at our appendix, because I'm not really stretching on any big math skills here. But when a graph has a perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal line, what does it mean about the relationship? It's elastic. So elastic and inelastic is what we did with supply and demand. So what does that mean if it's perfectly vertical, not thinking of elasticities? But you're on to kind of the right. I mean, there was a similar thing there with perfectly elastic, perfectly inelastic, but that's a micro topic. We got some non-micro people in here. What does it mean about the relationship between these two variables being measured, the quantity of money and the interest rates? It doesn't change, yeah. So there's no positive or negative relationship. So when we did the demand curve has a negative relationship between quantity and price. So if price goes down, quantity goes up, a negative relationship. The supply curve had a positive relationship. If price goes up, producers are willing to supply more. But with this type of relationship, it's saying there is no relationship. And the reason for that is that the quantity of money is controlled by the central bank. So they're choosing how much to make. If Janet chooses to run the printing press, this line moves over to the right. Right? She just chooses to have more money. So that is why we show it with a vertical line, because it's a choice by the Federal Reserve. All right, let me write some of that out before we get into demand. And all of these policy tools that I just did with, like this one, an increase of the discount rate moves the supply of money to the left. So all of those are going to connect into the supply of money. All right, so MS, money supply, is determined by the central bank, more generally. So around the world, whether we're in Canada or other places, whoever's controlling that money is going to be able to shift it around. So let's put a little note here. The three tools shift. Okay, so the interest rate is the nominal rate. And I wanted to comment on the quantity of money. So the money measured down here is the real quantity of money. So add, if you didn't, you wouldn't have done it. I left it off intentionally so that we could talk about it. This is the real quantity of money. When we see that real word, what does it mean? That's the first thing that comes to mind. It's kind of strange here, but real GDP, real wage, real interest rate. Now we've got the real quantity of money. What's been done to the numbers when we see the word real? What are we thinking? With the base year, yeah, it's tied into the base year. And so we link the prices back to the base year so that the real wage is now showing what? What is the real wage showing? Just kind of take it away from this one. The quantity of stuff that my wage buys. So I go to Walmart, how much stuff gets put into my shopping cart? So it's the purchasing power of the wage. And so here, the quantity of money has been adjusted for inflation in kind of the same way, right? So because otherwise it wouldn't be quite fair if we didn't adjust that for the base year prices. So usually with all of these graphs, there's been an adjustment to something real with each case. We had the real wage. With the capital market, we had the real interest rate. Now we have the nominal interest rate, but we have the real quantity of money. All right, so just think of inflation adjusted, right? So this is the inflation adjusted quantity of money is another way to think about it. We've taken into account inflation. All right, so money demand is downward sloping. And I like to think of the demand for holding money for purchases. Like how much of this stuff do you want to carry in your purse or wallet? So money demand shows the quantity of money demanded how much you want to hold shows the quantity of money demanded, in other words, kind of how much you want to hold at various interest rates. So given real real GDP, the expected price level, and financial innovation. All of which we'll mention here in a little bit, so just kind of hold tight. Given real GDP, the price, expected price level, and financial innovation. So I already mentioned the money supply shifters. What makes our demand for money move around? How much money do we want to hold in our wallets? So money demand shifters are the things we held constant when we drew the curve in the first place. So number one, a change in real GDP. If real GDP goes up, what happened to our incomes on average per person in the United States? If real GDP, if the economy's doing good and the economy's expanding, Trump wants to get us to 4% from 3%. If real GDP goes up, what happens to our incomes? They go up or down? They go up, right? So those two are one and the same, really. So we can think about this being a change in income because from the early chapters, those are interchangeable with each other. And so if people have more money, if people have more income, they will do what with it? What do people tend to do when they get a pay raise? They spend it. So in order to spend it, we're going to put some of it back into my wallet, right? So the demand for money is going to shift to the right as incomes rise. So if people have more income, they will hold more money for transactions. So an increase in real GDP leads to an increase in the demand for money. So an increase in income, as we start to have more and more prosperity, we're going to have an increase in the demand for money. All right, questions on that one? How about expectations of the future here? So number two is a change in the expected price level. A change in the expected price level. So let's go micro on you on this one. If you've heard that gas prices are going up this weekend, what do you do today? Go fill your tank, right? So when you expect prices to be higher in the future, you're going to go fill your tank today, which means you're going to need more money today to go fill your tank, right? So you're going to increase your demand for money for transactions because of future prices going up. So let's just put that example in here. If the price of gas increases, or wait, I screwed that up already. I don't want it to increase today. If the price of gas is expected to be more tomorrow, you fill today. So an increase in the price level overall of all goods and services, if we're expecting more inflation, it's going to increase money demand. All right, so now we can start to think about changes. Let's do an example. If the Fed announces this afternoon, announces an increase in the discount rate, what is your prediction on the interest rates? And quantity of money. So I'm just going to put dollar sign. All right, so we come over here. Fed's doing something. Are we talking money demand or money supply? Money supply, right? So that's our Fed doing that. And so is it going to be a shift to the right or to the left? To the left. So we have a contractionary monetary policy. So that move is going to cause us to shift from MS1 to MS2. And that leads to an increase of the interest rates from I1 to I2. And supply of money falls. All right, so the answer to this, an increase in the discount rate leads to a decrease in the money supply, which leads to an increase in interest rates and a decrease in the supply of money. And this is called a contractionary monetary policy. It's kind of the new thing I wanted to bring up here. So called a contractionary monetary policy. So the word contraction actually comes from the business cycle. So the business cycle was that little graph that we've done a few times with the ups and downs of the economy. And over time, we're looking at real GDP, expansion, peak, recession, trough, right? The ups and downs of the economy. And if Janet gets together with the other six and says, you know what, this economy is just really overheating. I think it's getting too high. I think we're setting ourselves up for a crash, right? So one of the objectives of policy is to try to smooth out the ride. So if it's possible, if this is the trend for GDP, is it possible for Janet and the team to make the ride a little smoother. Right? So the big question there is, can Fed help smooth the ups and downs? That's a big question that I'm starting to tee you up for, that we're going to spend the rest of the term doing, is like, should Janet be doing stuff like that? The hope is that if the economy's going, oh, it's getting too high, and then the down is going to be really bad, the idea is we'd like to have less volatility. And so if she starts to do a contractionary monetary policy, we might start to follow the blue line. Right? Let's pull back the reins. The horses are running wild. Let's pull it back a little bit. Contractionary monetary policy is part of its aim is to do that. All right, so questions there. All right. So our last little section that we need to look at is called the quantity theory of money. And let me want to show you some pictures here. All right, so just so you know, when you read through your books and check things out, I mean, it's doing kind of the same things we did with these types of graphs, money supply, money demand, so hopefully that'll all kind of start to gel for you. So this represents data from around the world of all countries. Actually, this is one, and this is kind of a blow-up of this little cluster down here. And so one of my favorite economists, Milton Friedman, started being concerned with countries, especially our own, that was starting to pursue policies that were running the printing press. What would be the end outcome if we started to print money? What happens to countries that print money? And what we find is that if we start to flood the market with dollars, we've got a lot of dollars in people's hands, and they start to feel richer. And when they feel richer, they start to bid up prices, right? Because the money's kind of fake money out running in the system. And so that tends to drive up prices of goods and services. And so there's a saying that there's too much money chasing too few goods. And so on this graph, we've got the growth rate of money. So how much is being printed every year? Is it coming at a rate of 2% per year, 10% per year, 20% per year, right? So the Federal Reserve is increasing the money supply at what sort of pace, right? So the growth rate of the money supply ended up having, he thought, a direct relationship to the inflation rate. And so this data kind of reflects that if we kind of think about a line here, that there's this upward slope to the connection between money growth and the inflation rate. Okay, so that's the quantity theory of money that we're going to spend. I just wanted to show you a little bit of that information before we jump into the theory. I probably should have left my one little picture there. Okay, so here was Uncle Milty's logic. So recall, so this is, let me put quantity theory of money up here first. Quantity theory of money. So this is Milton Friedman. And I think he came up with this in about the 1960s. And he started off thinking about what we've already studied, that real GDP is equal to a bunch of cigarettes. So spending categorized into its different parts looks something like that. And then he said, well, you know, another interesting way to think about it as it relates to money is that in order to buy goods and services, you need money. And so we can think about the value of things purchased. I don't know where my notes are. I don't really care, I suppose, whatever. All right, well, we'll figure it out. So we talked about this being real GDP, but it's also can be thought of it the same way for nominal GDP. So nominal GDP is price times quantity, which was real GDP, right? So nominal GDP, you don't have to erase that. Nominal GDP is price times real GDP, price times quantity. Remember when we did the whole business of nominal GDP equals the sum of price of good I times quantity good I equal 1 to n, right? So the value of chicken wings, the value of beer, the value of dental services, all that jazz. So we can think about nominal GDP as cigarettes, but we can also think about it as the quantity of money times the number of times a dollar gets spent. So if we're buying $16 trillion worth of stuff in the United States, that is being purchased with money. That money ends up getting spent a few times in the economy. So when it goes into one person's cash register, they put it in a deposit, kind of similar to our deposit multiplier, it goes to another store, right? So the same dollar is used to purchase the year's worth of inventory. So we've got the price level here. So the price level times real GDP, the quantity of stuff, equals the quantity of money times the V stands for velocity. And this is the average number of times the dollar gets spent. The average number of times a dollar gets spent. This equation is called the equation of exchange. Equation of exchange. All right, so Uncle Milty thought to himself, you know, real GDP is going to kind of be what it's going to be. Real GDP is like the production possibilities frontier. Shows the maximum combination of two goods an economy can produce given its available resources and technology. In other words, you can keep pumping money into the system, but if you haven't changed the quantity of labor, the quantity of capital or resources or technology, you can't have more stuff. So in the long run, this is going to be what it's going to be. It's kind of fixed. And then he also thought to himself, well, does the number of times a dollar turnover, is that really going to be fixed? Like the amount, kind of the velocity or the number of times it changes hands? Well, there's no reason to believe that would necessarily be fixed. So this brought up his quantity theory. So the quantity theory of money is this. It asserts that in the long run, not short run, but in the long run, real GDP and velocity are fixed or a constant. So if we rewrite the equation, and we think about this being fixed, so the math notation is we put a big bar over it. So the fixed part here is that velocity and real GDP are going to kind of be what they're going to be. They're independent of money. That brings up his quantity theory, that changes in the money supply will be proportionately matched by changes in inflation. Change this by 3%, this will be 3%. This by 10%, this will be 10%. And that's what that graph showed us, is there is a connection. There's a one-to-one, or potentially one-to-one connection for that to happen. So the quantity theory asserts that these things are fixed, and therefore changes in the money supply will be proportionately matched with changes in the price level. So more specifically, the growth rate of money, the percentage change in money, equals the percentage change in the price level, which is inflation. If you grow money by 10%, inflation's going to be 10%. It's not going to lead to real economic growth. Now, Janet Yellen doesn't like to hear this, right? Because we don't really care as an economy about prices. We care about the beers we drink, the chicken wings we eat, right? The stuff we do. We care about the quantities of things. This says that monetary policy is ultimately just going to be inflationary. It's not going to have any real effects. And so both politicians and the Federal Reserve didn't really want to hear that. And so Milton made this prediction, and then the 1970s kicked off, and the government didn't listen to Milton. Milton was kind of an outsider, by the way, at that point. And they said, oh, that's just one of those ivory tower economist academics. They don't know what they're talking about. So they pursued policy that ended up creating the largest amount of inflation that the United States ever seen. And all of a sudden, Milton was elevated to the king of monetary policy. And he predicted this before it actually happened through use of economic theory like this. All right, so I got a little surprise for you. We're about out of time. No formal class Friday. Remember I told you I'm going to go to the Federal Reserve, Miami branch? That's Thursday night. So I will be at this conference then. You have a video homework. So you still have the next video, but it's actually the next chapter, which is next week. So I'm getting you started on that. I've covered everything for this Saturday, Sunday homework. So you're okay for that, but I'm going to be sending out an email with the link to the Russ Econ Rocks video page that has the lecture material I want you to watch before Monday. Because I'm going to assume that you had watched that and then we're going to jump into more of it next week when we get back Monday. So any questions there? All right, have a good weekend.